Welcome to I Hate James Dobson, and welcome to our purity ball.
Yeah. Welcome to I Hate James Dobson. Check out my purity balls.
Welcome to I Hate James Dobson. I'm so excited to marry my dad.
Ugh.
Ew.
Hey everyone, this is Jake. As you can see from the title of the episode, today we're going to be talking about what purity culture actually is. As such, I wanted to give even more of a content warning than normal, as purity culture is super fucked up. Today we're going to be talking about a culture that enables sexual abuse and assault, especially child sexual abuse, for over an hour. Please take care of yourselves. So if you need to pause and come back to the episode, or if you just need to skip this one, that's totally okay. Much love from me regardless. And now, on to the show. Welcome to I Hate James Dobson. I'm Jake, a sex therapist and former evangelical. I'm joined today and every day by my favorite friend, Brooke.
Hi.
Brooke. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm going to practice talking sweet.
Sweetness of voice.
Sweetness of voice. Does this sound... I've been told my laugh can be a little harsh.
John Adams would be so happy.
This is my new sweet purity laugh. Ha 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 ha.
Brooke, how are you doing? How have you been since our last episode?
I've been doing really great since our last episode. I have not been tormented at all or having flashbacks or nightmares. It's been wonderful. How have you been?
I've been great. I've been hanging out with some friends, a friend, you. Mm-hmm. We record these episodes back to back. It's only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Brooke, very light icebreaker question. What were you taught about sex?
Okay. By my parents?
Yeah, just in general growing up.
I was never taught anything by my dad, who I don't think could ever even say the word sex. Mm-hmm. So that 0 from him. When I was, puberty age, my mom offered me a book that had a lot of drawings in it and information. It was a puberty book, but not it was graphic.
It was medically accurate.
Yes. I think that was I remember the first time I was like, all right, this is what's going on with the penis. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I taught myself a lot of that, but I knew the birds and the bees. I knew the basics of it pretty young. Mm-hmm. I don't remember how actually, but I think the kids just talked about it and put it all together.
Yeah.
I remember teaching my best friend about sex. I hope she's listening to this right now. If she were here, it would be so funny. Yeah. I taught her about it. She did not believe me.
Really?
Yeah. It was funny. And we laugh about that still to this day.
I remember talking to my good friend in 6th grade. His name was He was the only one who didn't know about sex in our grade. And then we had the sex talk in school and Horrified. And I was like, let me tell you about masturbation. And he also didn't believe me.
Yeah. Now, one thing that some of the readers of this podcast might not know is that I am just 1 or 2 years older than you. And so while you were being raised in purity culture and being very sheltered, I was raised in the 80s, and I was one of the younger kids in my huge family. So I had a lot of older siblings, and it was the 80s, and no one was trying to monitor anything they were saying in front of little kids. So now that I think about it, it's we all kind of knew about sex just always.
Yeah.
I don't remember really not knowing.
For most of human history, it's just been a part of life.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and you'd see it on TV, but I wasn't scandalized by it. It wasn't like I was seeing things that were inappropriate. It just was you heard about it, you saw it, you figured it out at some point, and then the puberty book gave me the real details.
I want to throw back, this is a deep cut, but in one of our very first episodes, we read a book where Dobson says, I think it might have been the first one, it was Dare to Discipline. And he said you should get your kids pets so they can watch them fucking learn about sex that way.
That's right. Imagine if you didn't know anything about sex and then the only reference you had was a tortoise. Oh God, that'd be so bad.
Brooke, what do you know about purity culture?
Okay, well, almost nothing, but I did recently learn about purity balls, which was not what I hoped it would be. And instead it was young women, which really just anyone under 20, basically marrying their dads and promising not to have sex until they were married.
Honestly, that's a pretty good summation of purity culture. Unfortunately, we're going to spend another hour talking about it. So.
Okay. Oh my God. This, I want to say, there have been things that we've talked about that I have like sort of heard about, or that I could assume what his thoughts on like homosexuality and stuff are. This is literally, I think, like what you wanted the most from this podcast. I truly know nothing about any of this. And the only references I have are like cults and cult documentaries, but I didn't really realize this was just happening to regular people.
You asked, I think in our very first episode, is this a cult?
Yeah.
And I gave kind of a wishy-washy answer because the difference between cults and not a cult is pretty gray sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Today, we're in episode 2 of our 4-part series about purity culture. Last episode, we read Dobson's horrific book, Bringing Up Girls, which made me so violently mad, I defaced a public library book. My apologies to the public library. I'm not paying for it, though. You're not going to to pay for that book. Today, we're going to look at purity culture as a whole and what it even fucking means. Let's talk about some history. Have you heard of the term sexual revolution?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you know about the sexual revolution?
In the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
60s and 70s, sexual revolution time.
Sort of reclaiming the idea of sexuality and sex and free love and all of that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That is pretty true to like the mainstream narrative of how we understand the sexual revolution in historical context. But there's kind of always been an ongoing sexual revolution. The term sexual revolution was first coined, at least as far as we know, in the 1920s. And there's always been this like battle for understanding sexuality in a more updated, more nuanced way, a more free way. Human culture has always had an evolving attitude towards sex and gender, and no one time period in any given culture has one consistent approach. Dobson and others will have you believe that until the 60s and 70s, pretty much all people in the United States fulfilled the 1950s ideal. 2.5 kids, white picket fence, etc. But even at that time, that wasn't actually attainable or even desirable for some people. There's a thing in American history called Levittown, which was the stereotype for white upper middle class suburbs. And it was just for that, white upper middle class people. After World War II, a lot of veterans got something called the GI Bill, which gave them money for school and housing. But that was explicitly forbidden for black veterans. They were not given the same opportunities. And so white veterans got to move out and create the suburbs and create Levittown. Women were also excluded from that unless they were married to men. So culture at the time had this division between the mainstream narrative, like, look at all these people having what the ideal is, a wife and kids and a fence and da-da-da. And then the reality of everyone else. And that is not included even at all in our mainstream narratives of like the sexual revolution. Modern leather culture, the gay BDSM subculture, began in the 40s and early 50s as veterans returned from war and missed the camaraderie around being around so many handsome and manly men. Swoon. Also a healthy dose of PTSD mixed in all of that as well.
Sure.
Playboy was founded in 1953, and the first Playboy clubs opened here in Chicago in 1960.
Oh, yeah, the Playboy House. Have you been by there?
I didn't know that was a thing until researching for this. Wait, where is it?
Oh, yeah. It's you probably go by it all the time. I think it's like in Lakeview somewhere.
Really?
Yeah. We'll look it up after this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have to go by it.
Yeah.
The incredibly titled pornographic film Deep Throat was released in 1972, garnering mainstream box office success. It helped kick off a wave of upper middle class interest in pornography that they called porno chic. Which I'm just imagining these like upper rich white people being like, oh my God, did you go see Deep Throat today? Look at what I'm doing. Look at my clothes. It's very funny to me.
The Chanel of porn.
The Chanel of porn. Oh my God. All of that to say, when we refer to the sexual revolution, it matters, but it doesn't fit into the clean black and white narrative that Dobson and purity culture offer. With the advent of penicillin and oral contraceptives, birth control pills, people had more agency over their bodies and could really rethink the rules of the 1950s waspy sexual morality. So an increase in sexual encounters between unmarried adults, and divorce rates were increasing, marriage rates were falling, open marriage, swinging, and even queer sexual orientations were being explored once again by well-respected white people. Some of the taboos around sex as a social construct were beginning to fall away. We're getting things like my personal problematic fave, Alfred Kinsey, and then later the duo of William Masters and Virginia Johnson, which pioneered a more comprehensive understanding of human sexuality. Again, this is all compared to white Protestants, which are the ones holding the levers of power. Many other cultures, even cultures in America, had better understandings of sexuality that were more informed than white 1950s America. Feminism was also deconstructing patriarchy. Simone de Beauvoir,
Simone de Beauvoir.
Thank you.
Is that right?
I think it's close. Simone de Beauvoir published her landmark text, The Second Sex, in 1949, explicitly critiquing patriarchy in a way that mainstream white writers and academics had not yet done. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique was published in 1963, exposing the pain and oppression felt by many women forced into the mores of the 1950s. It is into this environment that James Dobson releases Dare to Discipline, Ka-chow, where all these questions are explored. Dobson's response had been pretty consistently, no, that's evil and will bring you nothing but harm and destruction.
Mm-hmm.
All of Dobson's work is fraught with sexual anxiety. It seeps into every page of his books, and his hierarchy of gender, patriarchy, is just sexual tension. He doesn't want to be a cuck. This was a quote that we've talked about before, but it just feels so relevant to our conversation around sex and purity culture. Quote, why do you suppose that the reproductive urge within us is so relevant to cultural survival? It is because the energy which holds people together is sexual in nature. The physical attraction between men and women causes them to establish a family and invest themselves in its development. It is this force which encourages them to work together and save and toil and ensure the survival of their families. This sexual energy provides the impetus for the raising of healthy children and the transfer of values from one generation to another. It urges men to work when he would rather play. It causes women to save when she would rather spend. In short, the sexual aspect of our nature produces stability and responsibility that would not otherwise occur. Dobson's entire view of society is based on what he says is sexual tension, which is the weirdest kind of horny, but it's so horny. In classic Dobson fashion, he infused it with a politics of fear. Not only is premarital sex a sin against God, it will bring you, personally, destruction and the destruction of our society, cultural decay, etc. That was beginning to seem untrue, especially, again, advent of penicillin, oral contraceptives, the personal risk for sex began to start to fall away. And then on June 5th, 1981, 5 cases were reported of homosexual men with a rare form of pneumonia. By the end of 1985, there would be almost 13,000 recorded deaths of AIDS. Mm-hmm. 1985 was the first year that Ronald Reagan mentioned AIDS publicly by name, and if he had done so sooner, we could have had a whole different experience. Mm. I personally refer to AIDS as a government-sponsored genocide of queer people. That's a little bit of a spicy take.
Well, I agree.
But those hit most hard by AIDS were those who Dobson villainized. Black queer people especially, and those who had sex outside of marriage. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy when you deprive populations of access to stability and healthcare, not to mention the more explicit forms of violence like the gay panic defense and murder trials, or arresting people for being visibly queer, make them so vulnerable to devastations like AIDS. And then when disaster strikes, you can withhold any sort of care and then point to them and say, see, I told you this was a bad lifestyle. You see some people do a version of this now with trans suicide rates. Mm. They point to the fact that trans people, especially trans youth, face a higher risk of suicide compared to cis people, which is true, but they point to that as proof of transgenderism being evil, instead of understanding what's actually happening, which is being trans doesn't cause you to be suicidal, not being able to be yourself does.
Yeah, this is also really interesting because it's similar to this idea of, I always bring it back to this, but this idea of fat people being more unhealthy.
Yeah.
And it is in some ways actually true because fat people tend to be more scared to go to the doctor.
Yes.
Because they're treated so shitty at the doctor.
Uh-huh.
So they do not find things soon enough or quickly enough, right? It's not that the fatness is actually causing the problem. It's that the fear of the doctor is causing the problem.
Yeah. There's a joke feels not exactly... a cultural parable, I guess, of a person who lost an arm and blood is spewing everywhere, and the doctor said, "If you tried losing weight."
Yeah. I have that like cut out and taped to one of my books. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really true.
It is in this milieu of sexual anxiety and fear, especially around AIDS, that purity culture arises. Purity culture didn't exist until 1993.
Wow.
So it's pretty directly after AIDS.
You know, I take back what I said earlier. I don't know a lot about purity culture, but I do remember purity rings as like a cultural thing that was happening. It wasn't happening where I lived, but I did hear about, I mean, it was kind of a joke for us, right? Like we thought it was funny. Mm-hmm. We didn't really know what it was, but I did not ever connect that was because of AIDS and that was happening right on top of AIDS. That's interesting.
This is kind of my own narratives that I think come from a well-reasoned place, but I haven't seen really written anywhere. But that AIDS created such an intense sexual anxiety in the United States that it was primed for something like purity culture to say, we don't want any of that. Not only now are the right people dying, because that was especially early on, they're like, well, they're gay, they kind of deserve it.
Right.
But then the good people started getting sick. It's like, oh, now we just need to cut this out entirely. Now we need to abstain from all sort of sexuality. So in 1993, members of the Southern Baptist Convention, the type of evangelicalism I grew up in, founded the organization True Love Waits. Oh, yeah. This is where we're going to introduce some props. Brooke.
You just threw a purity ring at me. Is this is this real?
This was my purity ring. What is it? What does it say on it?
It says True Love Waits.
True Love Waits is an organization. It's also the name of the movement.
Did you wear this?
I wore this all the time.
You did.
I sure did.
I want you to know that this is where our cultures collide, because this was so real to you and like such a major part of your life. And this was like such a hilarious joke to all the teenagers where I lived. Like it's where we became aware of evangelical kids, right? I didn't know any, but like I remember, wasn't it like, there was like Justin Timberlake and stuff.
We're gonna get into it.
Yes. But we just would like, we were like, this is so stupid. Like, it was so funny.
And it is. You're correct.
I'm going to wear this for the rest of the podcast.
Absolutely. So the rest of, or the next part of this episode, we're going to do an iceberg. So you've seen the memes maybe of like, it's a picture of an iceberg and there's different layers. And the top, it's like mainstream culture. And the very bottom, it's like, ugh. So the top of the purity culture iceberg, general American Puritanism. America was founded by Puritans. Brooke is taking a picture of it. Please send that to me. We'll post that if you feel comfortable.
Well, how do I get it so that you can read it?
I always had love facing out.
Oh, okay. That's good. Yeah. There we go.
My grandma once referred to it as my virgin ring, which isn't inaccurate, but that's not what they're called, Grandma. Gosh. So the top of this iceberg, general American Puritanism. Mm-hmm. America has a really fucked relationship with sex. In Europe, for instance, women can walk around topless and or breastfeed their children because those are just breasts and part of your body and they're not inherently sexual. America's like, no female presenting nipples. That's just like part of our culture, right?
Yeah.
Everyone, whether you believe that or buy into that or not, everyone in America is impacted by that. That's the top of this pyramid. Not a whole lot to say. Underneath that, abstinence-only sex education. Ugh. Dobson loves him some abstinence-only sex education. He's railed against it in pretty much every book we've talked about as well. But abstinence-only education began its rise in the 1980s with Congress's Adolescent Family Life Act, which encouraged young people in the United States to abstain from sexual intercourse prior to adulthood and marriage. Bill Clinton had a Surgeon General by the name of Jocelyn Elders. Have you heard of her?
I don't think so.
She is the hero of this podcast.
Okay.
We stan her. She's incredible. Good. She was fired for daring to suggest that we teach masturbation as part of sex ed.
Oh my God.
In 1994.
Isn't it funny that like you would think that like masturbation would be okay and would help with abstinence only?
That's a huge part of this.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I give this back to you? I feel like my hand's going to burn into flames.
All right, birds. Oh no.
I want you to know though that it was not lost on me that fit perfectly on my ring finger.
It's very funny. It doesn't fit on mine anymore. Jocelyn Elders was not just fired for that one remark. She's had a number of controversial but also not statements. So in January of 1994, in the context of abortion, elders said, quote, "We really need to get over this love affair with the fetus and start worrying about children." Mm-hmm. Go off, bitch. Mm-hmm. Later that year, and this is the thing that specifically got her fired, she was invited to speak at a United Nations conference on AIDS. She was asked whether it would be appropriate to promote masturbation as a means of preventing young people from engaging in riskier forms of sexual activity.
Okay.
As it obviously is.
Right.
She replied, quote, "As per your specific question in regard to masturbation, I think it is something that is a part of human sexuality and is a part of something that perhaps should be taught. But we've not even taught our children the very basics. And I feel that we have tried ignorance for a very long time, and it's time we try education."
Amazing. Also just like, yeah. Right.
She's super courageous for saying this. I don't want to take away from that, but also like, yeah, of course.
I mean,
she was fired for that.
Oh God. It's so true. Like years of not wanting to teach kids anything or tell them anything at all, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to like, here, know what's happening.
I also feel it's incredibly relevant to point out that Jocelyn Elders is a Black woman.
Oh.
And so already there's this idea of like poisoning the culture, corrupting our kids.
Right. Of
course, it's going to be a Black woman who does it. I'm dubbing her right now the patron saint of this podcast. Mm-hmm. She has since passed R.I.P. I mean that actually. R.I.P. But you're a real one, girl.
Shout out to Jocelyn Elders.
We love you.
Shout out to mental illness. Shout out to masturbation.
Shout out to masturbation. Hell yeah. Let's talk about the state of sex ed in America right now.
Okay, great.
This is according to the Guttmacher Institute. As of 2023, how many states mandate sex ed, do you think?
Mandate it?
Yeah.
Probably not that many.
Over half.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
38 states mandate sex ed and or HIV education.
But parents can like sign their kids out of this, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So 39 states. So 38 states require education on sex ed and or HIV. 39 states require information to be provided on abstinence. So more states, it's not abstinence only necessarily, but mandate abstinence be part of that curriculum.
I mean, but it's like, duh.
10 states only mandate HIV education, not sex ed.
Okay.
And 40 states require school districts to involve parents in sex ed or HIV education.
How do you teach HIV education without talking about sex?
I think you mention it, but also like intravenous drug use, but you don't like get into sex ed is not just sex exists.
Well, right.
6 states require explicit permission for kids to participate. So some states are opt out. Maryland, where I went to high school, was an opt out. So your parents had to sign a form if they didn't want you to be part of sex ed, but otherwise you're going to be there. 6 states, it's an opt-in system. Your parents have to allow you to be part of it, which I feel is just dumb.
Weird.
29 states require abstinence to be stressed. So not quite abstinence only necessarily, but this is the best form, also birth control, but abstinence. 29 states.
I wonder if my parents had to sign a thing to let me take sex ed. I took it.
Yeah.
It would have been 1992 or 3.
Interesting.
In Ohio.
Yeah. Ohio.
Oh yeah, surprise. I lived in Ohio for a while.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
Only 18 states require sex ed to be medically accurate.
Wait, what?
Yes.
Say it again.
Only 18 states require sex ed to be medically accurate.
So otherwise you can just make it up and say whatever you want? What?
Yes. Because for some people, like James Dobson, medically accurate means teaching the fact that homosexuality
oh my God.
is fine or isn't inherently a terrible thing, or any type of sexual activity comes with the risk of STIs and HIV, but like also you could like take penicillin or there's PrEP, like things like that are medically accurate.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
20 states plus Washington, D.C. require information about contraceptives. Mm-hmm. 10 states require the importance of abstinence be stressed. I already said that one. 4 states require only negative information be provided about homosexuality. So if you're teaching about homosexuality, it's that it has to be negative. In 2023.
States require that?
Yes.
So if you randomly were a junior high teacher, you would have to teach that?
Mm-hmm.
What states?
Guess which states?
4 of them, you said?
Yep. I bet you can guess at least one.
Utah.
No.
No. Texas.
Also no. But you're in the right ballpark of, like, type of state.
The South.
These are all southern states, yes.
Okay. Georgia.
I'll give you the first one.
Yeah.
Florida.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
I wouldn't have actually guessed Florida.
Really? Because that's where the Don't Say Gay bills were passed,
Oh,
right?
right, of course. Of course. And, okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, well, what are the other ones? Alabama,
Florida,
Arkansas,
Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi.
Okay, fine. Well, fuck all those places anyway.
Absolutely. Also, if you're listening to there, God bless you.
Yeah. But also, maybe it's time to move.
Maybe it's time to move. Maybe it's time to stay and fight. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but
Yeah, right, true.
doing the Lord's work. You and Jocelyn Elders. So that's tier 2. It's just abstinence-only education. It's a part of purity culture, but it's not capital P purity, capital C culture TM, right? It's
How
not...
can you... Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just stuck on this. How can you mandate that a teacher only say negative things about gay people?
Well, like, it is technically true that gay men are at higher risk for HIV and AIDS, for instance.
Sure.
But focus on that and not the fact
I see. All right.
Right. You can't say it's an equal lifestyle. It's equally valid and deserving of respect. Editing Jake here, I want to take a moment and talk a little bit more about the impact of abstinence-only sex education. Firstly, 30% of public middle and high schools in the United States teach students abstinence-only sex education, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. From 1982, the United States government had spent over $2 billion in funding abstinence-only programs. Our good friend James Dobson is particularly responsible for these programs, as federal funding began in the 1980s when Dobson sat on various policy councils for the Reagan administration. Since then, the United States has loved abstinence-only education. Bill Clinton's presidency gave federal funding only for abstinence-only sex education, no other more comprehensive type. George H.W. Bush further increased these funds. Donald Trump, perhaps unsurprisingly, even further increased funding for them. And Joe Biden has kept funding for abstinence-only sex education at Donald Trump levels. Despite this, we know from the data that these programs do not work. They do not delay the initiation of sexual intercourse in adolescence. Those who are going to have sex will do so regardless of if you give them sex ed or not. In the United States, approximately 57% of high schoolers will have sex before graduation, and this number is pretty consistent across the country. This runs entirely contrary to the stated purpose of these programs. Abstinence-only education only deprives people, children, of the ability to make informed decisions about their bodies and their sexualities. States that emphasize abstinence-only programs have a higher incidence of teenage pregnancies and births, and according to the Department of Health and Human Services, these programs have no effect on reducing the rates of HIV or other STIs. Finally, these programs rely almost exclusively on fear and shame, hurting everybody. Trust me, as a sex therapist, deconstructing shame connected to sexuality is something that I do with pretty much all of my clients. It is pervasive and it is insidious, and I can come to no other conclusion than that the sole actual purpose of these programs is to enforce a patriarchal, heterosexist system. Not to actually improve the lives of anyone or to keep kids safe, but to keep power set up in the same way. The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine opposes abstinence-only sex education. I, Jake, believe that it is a fundamental human right to know about your body, to be able to talk about what's going on in your experiences and make informed decisions for yourself. And abstinence-only education, to me, denies you of that ability, denies you of that fundamental human right. We'll talk a little bit more about what actual sex education could look like in a future episode. Stay tuned. Tier 3, purity rings and pledges. There are a number of child Disney stars who were contractually obligated to wear purity rings.
What?
Yeah. Miley Cyrus had to wear a purity ring when she was under Disney contract.
Get out.
Most famously, the Jonas Brothers did. You'll see, when I was doing research for this, I typed in Disney star purity ring. The Jonas Brothers were like the top of the list in a lot of places. But also, Selena Gomez.
Oh my God.
Demi Lovato, Jordan Sparks. I had conflicting reports of whether or not Britney Spears was forced to wear a purity ring or not, but it would not shock me.
Do you wear it on your wedding finger?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, you wear it wherever you want. It's kind of a personal choice. Different cultures and places, different things. But so purity rings are one thing. There's also purity pledges. So a traditional purity pledge will go something along the lines of believing that true love waits, I've made a commitment to God, myself, my family, my friends, and my future mate and my future children to be sexually abstinent from this day until the day I enter biblical marriage relationships.
Gross.
So True Love Waits, the organization, got famous for making these pledges.
And Disney was like, we're on board.
Well, yeah, they want to, like the Disney princesses, they want to promote a model of virginity.
Oh, right. Is Disney religious?
No, not necessarily. I mean, they're capitalists, so they go wherever they get the most money. And for a while, the way to make most money was present kids as pure.
Right, okay. Even though we all know how that turned out.
Exactly, and we're going to get to that in just one second. So, True Love Waits was founded in 1993, and their big push was to get kids to sign this purity pledge. In their first year, Brooke, how many kids do you think signed a pledge for purity?
A lot.
Give me just like, talking thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions.
I would say thousands.
102,000 in their first year.
Oh my God.
Or so they say. So in 1994, the year after they were founded, they orchestrated a big demonstration in Washington, D.C. They covered the National Mall, which is a lawn, it's not an actual mall, in purity pledge cards. So they put these cards on like little sticks or forks and stuck them into the ground and just covered the lawn as to show the nation that there is a wave of kids who are cared about purity. To me, this stands as an evil, like, circus mirror house version of a much more important demonstration called the AIDS quilt. The AIDS quilt was first displayed at the National Mall in 1987. They had made one patch per person who had died of AIDS, as submitted by loved ones, so it's not the total number. Mm-hmm. The first year, the quilt had 1,920 patches and covered a space larger than a football field. It then became kind of a popular sign of public demonstration against the Reagan administration's inaction on AIDS. In 1988, it had 8,288 panels.
Wow.
And they used that as a demonstration. And then 88, so 6 years later, purity culture did the same thing, but with purity pledges. I don't think they're trying to necessarily do the same thing. Protesting on the national law is a good way to get national law is a good way to get attention, but it just feels so related to me.
Yeah. Where is the AIDS quilt?
The AIDS Memorial Quilt is under the stewardship of the National AIDS Memorial in San Francisco. Each year, thousands of the quilt's nearly 50,000 panels are displayed throughout the U.S. and the world, meaning you yourself might be able to go out and see part of the AIDS quilt. I think that's really neat. Anyway, these dweebs put pledge cards and forks and stakes and cover the national lawn to signal they're a bunch of teens committed to purity like losers. And then, most of them forgot or repressed it like a year later, because the whole thing is stupid.
Right.
People are dying, Kim. A study done by Columbia University showed that while many adolescents who had taken virginity pledges do so to abstain from sexual activity, those who eventually break their pledge are at a higher risk for unsafe sex the first time than adolescents who did not take a virginity pledge at all. The study showed that virginity pledges were the most effective in small groups of pledgers in at least a partially non-normative setting, meaning that if abstinence is not the norm, those taking a virginity pledge are more likely to adhere to it. So, a lot of peer pressure. If all of your friends are taking the pledge, you're going to take the pledge too, but it doesn't mean you're going to take it seriously.
No, we all know Justin Timberlake banged Britney Spears. Famously.
Unfortunately for her.
Yeah.
These pledges and purity rings are, at best, very silly.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit ridiculous still having mine. I want to do something with this. I don't know what. I want to turn it into some kind of artistic project.
Definitely.
I haven't decided. People have told me I should make it into a cock ring, but not to brag. My cock's a little bit bigger than my ring finger. So listeners, submit your idea of what I should do with my purity ring.
You're so funny.
Underneath purity pledges and purity rings, this is where we're going to start breaking into some really gender essentialist things. For men, it's like nofap, and for women, it's those really frumpy dresses that you were talking about. Uh-huh. I call it solo modified behavior. Women and girls have to be hyper aware of their clothing, so no bikinis, no pants, no spaghetti straps, lest you let a man see your shoulder and be tempted. And men have to not look at porn.
Uh-huh.
What a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Thank you for your cervix.
You know, there's a part in the carriage scene in Bridgerton where he pulls her dress off her shoulder.
Wow.
Very sexy.
It's a hot shoulder action.
Yeah.
This is starting to get into more like solidified purity culture as like the brand. But you can engage with these. Like there's a lot of men who do no FAP adjacent things, like not masturbating. Currently, the big term is like semen retention, which, as a side note, doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. Men, you're not going to become more focused or get healthier skin. Women aren't going to love you more if you don't jerk off. If you want to jerk off for whatever reason, that's your decision. God bless. But you're not going to get these like incredible health effects from it.
Yeah.
Underneath that, though, we get bringing others in to help modify behaviors. Accountability partners. This is really where purity culture gets weird and gross. There's a program called Covenant Eyes.
Oh, is this the computer thing?
House Speaker Mike Johnson has Covenant Eyes. Brooke, what do you know about it? It is a computer thing.
It doesn't allow you to like look at porn and dirty stuff on your computer, right?
Not only does it not allow you to do that, if you try to, it will send a specified accountability partner a report of what you tried to look at.
Let's get it.
I had it.
You did?
I had Covenant Eyes. I had a number of things based on this because I was a sexual person, and when I was 17, God forbid a 17-year-old be horny. Unheard of.
Did you ever get something sent to your accountability partner?
I sure did. My accountability partner's name, I'm going to bleep it. His name is He was my best friend.
Oh my God.
Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, the person second, third in line to be president, has Covenant Eyes. His accountability partner is his son.
What?
Yes. So if I keep saying Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, it's insane. If Speaker of the House Mike Johnson looks at porn, his son will know about it. He's talked openly about this. He's proud of this.
This is disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
Also, give me a break. It's 2024. You put Covenant Eyes on your computer and then you go jerk off on a different computer.
I mean,
like, come on.
Yeah. That's kind of the folly of one of the follies of all of this.
Yeah.
We're also getting into the like victim blaming. This is more for women, but can happen to some men as well. But this is bringing in other people. So a woman says, "Hey, I'm having these sexual feelings," or God forbid, I was sexually assaulted. Well, what were you wearing?
Right.
What did you do to tempt him? Mm-hmm. It's bringing in other people to help modify behavior. Or even if you don't do that, having other people tell you and police you, and bringing in your dad to say you can't wear that outside. Like, this is a big part of purity culture.
Okay, you can cut this, but I just want to make sure you know that this is happening. Have you seen Man versus Bear on TikTok?
Yes.
Okay, so then there was this guy. He was being serious, and he said, "This is really triggering. I hate this trend because my mom was attacked and killed by a bear." And then all these people were like, "Well, what was the bear wearing? Maybe the bear had a good future ahead of it," and blah blah blah. Like, it was so wild.
Yeah.
But I just was like, "Oh my God, yeah." Yeah, I mean, it is, and that has been a profound thing, right? When people are like, "I'd rather pick the bear because at least people would believe me."
Yeah.
You know, like, it's so true. It's scary.
We're also getting into purity balls. I put purity balls in this section as well. Again, having other people tell you how to modify your behavior and be part of this like culture of not only do you not jerk off at all, you are to remain pure. And we'll talk about all of the like weird stuff that goes into purity in a little bit as well.
You're going to make me hear about purity balls again.
We're not going to get into detail. We got into enough last time.
Okay.
We're getting into other terrible things. The last rung to me of purity culture is just actual rapists.
Oh, wow.
Actual people who commit sexual assault. It is not a formal part of purity culture as they would advertise it. Like, the Southern Baptist Convention is going to say these people are part of purity culture. But with all of these structures around it, as we've been talking about a lot last episode as well, it's the women's responsibility. Men have these uncontrollable urges. You create so much excuse for people, for often men, but not just men, but often men, to assault other people and kind of get away with it. We know many names, but we'll never know all of the names. I talked about this in our last episode with Jordan, but there's this preacher, Ravi Zacharias, who abused women his entire ministry. And he was one of the most prominent like theologians, apologists in the world. And he got away with it largely because of purity culture. That's where this all leads, really. Even if you yourself are not a rapist, it creates that excuse for it. So what actually counts as abstinence? Let's talk about purity. What does purity mean? What counts as abstinence? Obviously, not having sex till marriage, right? That feels like the most straightforward definition, but clearly it's a lot more than that. We talk about porn. When you think of purity culture, what does that mean to you?
I think of like almost no physical contact, except for maybe like that weird, we've talked about this before, that like aggressive hand holding.
Yeah.
Or like there's like chaperoned contact, or like you sort of have to commit to a very serious relationship when you're pretty young.
Absolutely.
But really, obviously it's no sex, but I think it's like no masturbation, no porn, no sex, and really nothing.
Yes.
Were you allowed to even like kiss the person?
So it kind of varies. First of all, different people have different takes on it, right? The Catholics famously have what's called the poophole loophole, or as Garfunkel and Oates famously wrote a song about it called "Fuck Me in the Ass Because I Love Jesus."
I love that song.
Yeah, that's about purity culture, right? We have to be abstinent, but abstinence only means vaginal sex. For us good Christians, evangelicals, it actually means much more than that. Hand holding, kissing, thinking about a woman lustfully, like all these things fall into masturbation. The line that I was taught about masturbation is masturbation itself isn't a sin, but lust is. So you can find a way to masturbate without lust, you'd be okay.
What?
I don't even know what that means.
I don't even know what that means either.
Also, we're going to get into this a little bit more. The way that they describe how men experience sexuality has never been how I tend to find men attractive. I'm attracted to masculinity generally. I've never looked at a man and gone automatically, wow, I need to put my penis inside of him.
Right.
That's never, like, even if I'm, like, sexually attracted, I'm like, wow, he's hot. It's never been, like, and therefore I need to fuck him. And the narrative that I was told about how men experience things is just this, like, you get these lustful thoughts of women and you just, like, need to have sex, or you feel like you need to have sex with her. And I've never experienced sexual attraction that way. And honestly, for a long time, I thought that made me a really good Christian, but I think just makes me a normal person.
I think so.
I have some Bible verses, and I pulled some of these straight out of my brain because of Awana, and they're stuck in there.
Oh my God.
And some I had to look up.
Yeah, I forgot about Awana.
I wish I could. This is probably the most famous one. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. That's Matthew 5:28. That's from Jesus.
That's so unfair.
Yes.
Like, you can't control that.
I also don't quite know what that means. Again,
Right.
like, if I say, like, wow, you're hot, is that looking at you lustfully? Do I have to be, like, touching my dick while I do it?
Right.
If I get a boner, is that counting as lust? But if not, then I'm okay. I don't actually understand what really that means.
Right.
Another pretty common one in purity culture: flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside his body, or whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. This is 1 Corinthians 6:18. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry. Colossians 3:5. Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So when you ask a person deep in purity culture, like, what counts as purity? Is it this? Is it this? They'll ask, well, why you try to get as close to the line as possible? You should flee. You should go as far away from sexual immorality as possible. The fact that you're trying to ask, does this or this count, means that you're really acting as the world wants you to, not how Jesus wants you to. Which is also bullshit. Again, even when I was deep in this, I was like, what's the difference between finding someone attractive and looking at them lustfully?
God, you know what makes me sad about this is that, like, sex is already so confusing and complicated when you're a teenager and you're learning about it, like, or whatever age you are, but like it's already so fraught. When I think about you growing up, like, with this, just with like sex being complicated to begin with, and then being in this evangelical bullshit and how complicated that would make everything, because you really have to fight against your own urges and your own body. And then thinking about you being gay on top of it.
Yeah.
God, Jake. I mean, I really admire you, like, for being you. Like, what a lot to go through.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've kind of made jokes about it, but also kind of not jokes, that it's so horny.
Yeah.
I'm a therapist, yes, but actually my training is in human sexuality, because what purity culture does is it forces you to think about sex all the time.
That's what I was just thinking about. Like, I grew up in like waspy suburbs, and no one talked about it, right? Like, I mean, we knew, like I said, we knew about it and stuff, but like, it wasn't like we were hearing about it all the time or thinking about it all the time in this kind of context. Like, yeah, it was right there all the fucking time.
Yeah. If you tell someone, don't think of an elephant, well, guess what you're thinking of?
All the time.
An elephant.
Yeah.
And that's the message that's constantly instilled in you. You're constantly policing it. One of the biggest predictors of sexual problems, like internally, is shame. You can watch the same types of pornography for the same amount, for the same duration, but if you have shame and guilt about it, it will come up in all these really fucked ways, where if it's just like, yeah, it's part of my sexuality, it's fine, you're not going to get anxiety about it in the same way. You're not going to have potentially sexual dysfunction, like erectile dysfunction or vaginismus or whatever. There are other factors that go into those things, obviously, but like, it's really about what it means to you. And what purity culture tells you is this is bad and evil, and this part of you is bad and evil.
Wow.
For this episode, I didn't name this up top, but I watched a documentary. It has a horrible title, or perhaps amazing title. It's called Give Me Sex, Jesus.
That's an amazing title.
There's also no commas, so it's like, give me the Jesus who focuses on sex. Give me the sex Jesus. I don't know. But there's a quote from the documentary, quote, "What I find in evangelical culture, it's more of a self-questioning and self-doubt. So even though the rhetoric says I'm not going to kiss anyone until I'm married, and that's a path I'm on, then all these things happen along the way where you're not sure if you've lived up to the ideal because you've had fantasies of kissing someone. Does that count? No, that's a sin too. So then you didn't really attain your ideal, and you have to ask for forgiveness, and then you start over and over and over again." End quote. These cycles of guilt and shame soak sexuality. And it's really, really hard to undo that for anyone. Again, we live in this puritanical American society, and doing that and letting people be sexually liberated itself is hard. When you have this soaked into the essence of your sexuality, it's real tough. It's real difficult.
Yeah.
Editing Jake again. One last tangent to talk about the role of race in purity culture. Although you'll be hard-pressed to find explicit mentions of race in purity culture literature, the white supremacy on which evangelicalism is built is baked into the essence and assumptions of purity culture. I'm going to turn now to an interview from Reckon.News with 3 experts on Christian nationalism and purity culture. Bradley Lanishi, professor of religion at Skidmore College, author and host of the podcast Straight White American Jesus. Sarah Mosliner, professor of religion at Central Michigan University, author and creator of the After Purity Project, and Angie Hong, a Korean-American speaker, writer, and theologian. The interview is obviously longer than these quotes, and it's really good, so I encourage you to read it for yourself. The relevant highlights here are, from Angie Hong, quote, "White Christian nationalism is the entanglement of the notion of a white heteronormative family that strives for success and wealth. That ideal family is enabled and undergirded by a Christian, mostly evangelical spirituality and theology. This mentality has taken hold within political power and really has become entangled to a point where the two are indistinguishable from each other." From Sarah Mosliner, purity culture is the sexual regime of white Christian nationalism. The image of all of the individual purity cards on the lawn of the National Mall in July 1994 really says something. They were very clear about wanting to change the national conversation about sexuality. Being, quote, pure was part of being a Christian and also being part of an American citizen. That is white Christian nationalism, but they're doing it in a way that is completely unaware of the race's history and the concept of sexual purity. The myth of pure white womanhood includes the myth of the black male rapist. You can't have one without the other, because that's how they were constructed. This myth is the reason Emmett Till was murdered. If you believe that the white Christian family that's going to follow, quote, Christian values is the foundation of a safe and secure nation state, is an expression of purity culture. And finally, from Angie Hong, the concept of purity is distorted by race. Racialized bodies cannot be 100% pure because of the history of dehumanization of African Americans and Orientalism, which is the exotification of Asian bodies. If we're not able to be fully pure, then we must seek and evangelize to be welcomed. The problem with assimilation is that we will never be white. The theological notion of purity, which includes sexual purity, is expansive and part of white supremacy, something that we can never achieve. It keeps us in the position of being other while helping to support the white ideals of Christian nationalism." End quote. A group of white American conservatives talking about purity is laced with racism as potent as a bottle of scotch laced with arsenic. While this isn't the focus of the episode, I'd be remiss not to give it the spotlight. But now, back to our regularly scheduled show. So let's talk about what purity culture actually believes. Mm-hmm. Any intimacy meant for marriage should only exist in marriage. So yes, sex is a part of that, but so is dating, so is kissing, so is hand-holding, so is fantasizing.
Fantasizing, wow.
Even anything more than a quote-unquote platonic relationship with members of the opposite sex, because this is also incredibly heterosexual, it is considered unhealthy or sinful. Any type of like emotional intimacy with a woman, for me, would be considered sinful. Sex outside of marriage is not only morally wrong, it's destructive to you and others, the politics of fear that we've talked about. And this is really where things, I think, this is really the crux of purity culture to me, that it portrays men as inherently sexual predators who cannot control themselves. It is up to women around them to help keep them in check.
Oh, God.
Men might get a slap on the wrist sometimes, but what was she wearing, right? Mm-hmm. That's the dynamic of purity culture. Men, in this view, are uncontrollable, horny monsters. Left to their own, any man will sleep with any female. It's a deep violence that they don't want to critique. It's just taken as an inevitable fact. Again, those cultural values around sex and gender that are taken for granted become biological truths. And the fact that we have patriarchy that inflicts violence, especially sexual violence, against people, often women, that's taken as, well, that's just natural. As opposed to, hey, maybe we could build society differently, or we could teach men to be different. Mm-hmm. The only way to teach men to be different is to help women not tempt them. It's only shame, marriage, and Jesus that keeps men in check. Men, dads, guard their daughter's purity through purity balls and marriage. When a man passes his daughter's sexual purity to another man through marriage, that's the giving away. Mm-hmm. That's always been kind of a weird thing about marriage as the Western culture has understood it, but purity culture makes it so explicit.
Yeah.
And for women need to fear men, but also protect them from themselves. You can't tempt a man. And there are some general rules that you can do, like wear modest clothing, but every man has different temptations, so you need to be aware of all the men in your life and what's going to tempt them. Not only to protect yourself, but to protect them. You don't want to make them sin. Because if they sin, yeah, it's going to hurt you. But to sin against themselves.
Yeah, but this is also a way to protect men in general, right? Of this whole culture. Because it's like, then if something does happen, the women are conditioned to try to figure out what they did wrong.
Exactly. Women are women are helpers that are either saintly Madonnas or debased whores. Mm-hmm. Women are allowed to look at boobs because they're not turned on by them, whereas men are always attracted to breasts.
Okay.
And again, growing up as gay, this was very confusing. Growing up as gay, and I lived in Europe for a significant part of my childhood. And I love breasts, they're fine, but I'm not like, ooh, I need to jerk off because I saw a titty one day.
How did you navigate, was there a time before you realized that you were gay that you were like, I'm so good at this?
Yeah. So, one, all sexuality is weird and fluid, and gay is the best label, but I have found plenty of women and gender nonconforming people I'm attracted to. But all that actually gave me more. When I talked about this a little bit before, but I dated girls in high school, I thought I was killing it. I was like, wow, I'm not tempted once to sleep with you. I want to respect you as a person. And part of it is just like, I think most people want to respect other people, actually, especially when you get to know them. But also it was like, wow, because I'm gay, but it means I'm choosing abstinence and choosing virginity and choosing chastity. Importantly, though, there are people who I know who are asexual.
Yeah.
And who grow up thinking they're killing it and then think when they get married, a switch is going to flip because that's how the script goes. And then it doesn't. And then they feel broken or bad or evil. Or then they're like, am I secretly gay because I'm not interested in my wife in that way? I love her. But like, it's all sorts of confusing. It's all sorts of weird. Any type of queer sexuality generally is hard in a cis heteronormative society. Mm-hmm. But with this on top of it, it's like, am I good because I don't want this? Or do I not want this and I'm gay, which is worse? My accountability partner was also 16 and 17, so this is no fault of him, but he was so horny. And he told me in detail about all the ways he almost had sex with his girlfriend. But then I came out as gay, and he had this deeply holier than thou attitude. The essence to me, of purity culture, of this episode, purity culture is rape culture.
Yes.
It's rape culture with a Bible, with a smile on its face, but it's just rape culture.
Yes.
And I don't think that gets expressed as directly as it should be. The things that we're noting here, men are these uncontrollable horny monsters, women need to protect themselves and wear nice things, you need to be accountable, and da-da-da. That's just rape culture. That's saying that rape is some inevitable part of life and of specifically men's sexuality that can only be accounted for, that can't be controlled. That's evil and also wrong.
Right.
Just like logically, intellectually wrong, let alone morally incorrect. Let's talk about some of the impacts of purity culture. Again, it perpetuates rape culture, as we've talked about. They're so disinterested in dismantling the system. This is the way things are inevitably. Only God can change people's hearts, which won't happen on a mass scale until the rapture and Jesus comes back.
Oh, God, okay.
So what's the point of even trying? Individually, I can change my heart, but we can't change society. We can't make it a better place. Excuses like what was she wearing become highly relevant here. If she was dressing provocatively and was assaulted, it's kind of on her. She should know that men can't control themselves. Also, so much shame. Shame all around. Internalized shame. It's totally normal for people to think and fantasize and want sex. Purity culture tells you that sex is inherently gross and demeaning and violent and scary until you get married, and then all of a sudden it's great. And that switch can be such a mindfuck for people. Also hot, right? Ooh, demeaning, scary, violent, gross. I love those things. But like,
bad.
That's because I'm a pervert. Also, to your point, what if you're too good about it? Asexual people exist. Queer people exist. I was seemingly good at purity culture because I never had a lustful thought towards my girlfriends. But that is actually bad for our relationship. No one will want you if you're a slut. I mean, usually, no man will want you as a wife if you've slept around. And we're seeing a really gross resurgence of this through your Andrew Tates of the world, through the manosphere. High-value women, high-value men. It's not through the language of religion as much. Although, when you dig just a little bit below the surface, it deeply is tied to religion. But this is having a resurgence nowadays. I work with a number of teen boys, or people who know and love teen boys. They are deep in that world. It's actually pretty scary.
Whoa.
Yeah. Because anything related to sex might make a man, or even a lady, think lustful thoughts, it's best not to even talk about it. That's why conservatives hate sex ed. We shouldn't be teaching our kids about their bodies. We shouldn't teach kids about sex, because then they're going to want to go out and do it. Which isn't how it works.
No, it's not how it works.
I also, and there are legal scholars who agree with me, that not teaching kids about their bodies is actually low-key a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
It robs people of the agency of their bodies and to talk about their experiences. Teaching kids comprehensive sex education in age-appropriate ways is actually an incredible way to reduce childhood sexual abuse.
Right.
Because kids, if something happens to them, they can then say, hey, my teacher touched my penis.
Right.
Or
this,
my dad,
I know this is wrong.
I know this is wrong. And I have agency in my body. I can consent or not. And we'll get into this in a different episode, like how this can actually mean. But you can teach kids about consent in ways that aren't just about sex.
That's
like,
right.
Do you want to hug this adult? You
Right.
get to decide what you do with your body.
And really, it's all... this is what brainwashing is. This is why it's like a cult, right? Because all of this is trying to teach people to go against their human nature and what they're feeling. Most people experience sexual feelings to some extent, right? Or whatever. But like, this is the same as like diet culture. It's the same as everything. It's like, don't listen to your body. So then when something happens, you know, you have no idea if it's right, if it's wrong, if you should be scared. And this is how we develop self-hatred, right? This is the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have engaged in my worst self-harm behaviors because of purity culture, not in spite of it. This isn't in this order of the outline, but let's talk about purity. If you're making if you want to protect a child's purity, if you want to protect a child's innocence, and you're only defining it as sexuality, that's evil. My purity was taken from me not when I was molested, not when I was self-harming because I was gay. My purity was taken from me when adults told me you are evil and sinful and inherently broken. That robs children of their purity more so than letting them masturbate. But you're so focused on this one idea of virginity because that's how men get their wives. There's also this like weird double standard where, like, yes, theoretically they want men and women to be pure before marriage, but if women aren't virgins, no one's going to want you. If a man's not a virgin, you should be.
Right. Yeah, if a woman's not a virgin, it's dirty or unclean.
It's horrible. It's the defining feature of them, and no one's ever going to want them. Whereas if a man's not a virgin, well, hopefully your wife can learn how to accept that about you and move on. It's in your past before you met Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear the word impure about men.
Not really. No. Purity culture, people in purity culture then don't know what good sex is. And I'm not just talking, there's this like gross talking point of like, well, how do you know if you're even compatible if you don't have sex before you're married? There's a little bit of a point to that, but it is not the point that internet atheists think that they're making.
Right.
I mean, sex shouldn't hurt. Vaginal tears or anal tears are possible without lubrication, or even potentially with lubrication. The fact that you shouldn't use sugar-based lubes on a labia because then you can get a yeast infection, these are just things you should know about sexuality about sex before you engage in sex. How to buy condoms, right? These are things that just aren't given to people. Periods aren't a fun experience, but things like birth control can help even if you aren't having sex. And if your period hurts too much, you might have something called PMDD, called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. That's like a diagnosable thing that you can get treatment for and help about. But that's not given to people when you're not able to talk about sex. How to recognize an STI or how to treat it. They aren't what you deserve for having sex. They suck, and there are things you can do about it. Most STIs are treatable, or are curable, meaning you completely get rid of them. But if not curable, like HIV, they're treatable. You can take, if you have HIV, you can take a daily medication that will reduce your viral load, meaning 1, it won't develop into AIDS, and 2, you can't pass it on to other people. These are important conversations for people to have around sex and sexuality that purity culture and abstinence-only sex education get off the table.
I mean, even in sex education, there's so much that's not discussed. Did you know that if you take antibiotics while you're on the pill, it cancels out the pill?
Editor's note, this is only somewhat true. According to Planned Parenthood, common antibiotics like amoxicillin will not change the effectiveness of birth control. However, the antibiotic rifampin, sometimes called Rifidin or Mactane, can lower the effectiveness of the pill, the patch, and the ring. Rifampin is used less commonly than amoxicillin and is generally used to treat tuberculosis, but the lesson here is that you should be sure to tell your doctor about whatever medicines you're taking, whether or not they're officially prescribed. And as we've talked about, purity culture creates a culture primed for abuse. People isolated in shame, sexually oppressed, and dying to express it somehow without the knowledge to tell other people about their experience. Any man can be an authority figure, so telling anyone about your story is disobedience, right? I don't want to tell victims of Ravi Zacharias felt like they couldn't tell people because not only did he have this entire media thing that like, oh, by telling people you're going to bring down this media, you're going to think about people that could be saved if you just kept quiet. If your husband assaults you, well, it's kind of his right, and by telling people, you're just obeying him, and that's a sin.
Yeah, and even if people believe you and, you've been assaulted or raped, you are still impure. You are still unclean, right?
Yes.
Like, you have still, quote, lost your virginity, right? And so that's another reason why these things don't get reported, because the way that the woman is looked at still, right? No matter what. There
are also some people who will wait until they get married and then still don't have sex, right? Because they feel like that's more pure in some way, which if that's a personal choice for you to make, sure, I guess. But we're just getting to these weird, like, I'm more pure than you, I'm holier than you because I did this thing or the thing, or I've sacrificed so much. We're nearing the end of this conversation. I want to quote some actual people's experiences. So There's various Reddit posts about people talking about their experiences with purity culture. I have some things pulled from the internet. Mm-hmm. Quote, I had no vocabulary around sex and sexuality, so I had no way to recognize a toxic relationship when I was up to my neck in it. I have weird hangups around sex. I was told that men are the sexual ones, and once you get married, they're just going to want you to do it all the time. You just have to lay back and take it. So it's basically like the church didn't believe sex could be enjoyed by women or something. So I have zero ability to initiate sex in an actual sexy way. I like sex, but I am absolutely 0% sexy, and I don't know how to get sexy or initiate anything. And sometimes it's a pain point between me and my husband, who did not grow up in the church. I'm in a healthy relationship, and I feel guilty for receiving pleasure. Not even from that, I'm told I'm beautiful, and I feel guilty.
These are sad.
Yeah. I think this really speaks to at least my experience and the experience of my peers. I grew up with it and was told that having a crush was the same as adultery or worse. Because you're committing adultery in your heart by having a crush, a thing that 6th graders absolutely isn't normal for them to.
Oh my God.
Purity culture is another example of you didn't have to grow up in an evangelical to be soaked in their beliefs. This plague on society has distorted multiple generations' views on sex and relationships. It overemphasizes sex being once at the same time the most important thing about you, also the most dangerous part about you. It takes all the assumptions of rape culture for granted, as Dobson is wont to do. This is one of the dangerous parts of bioessentialist myth. It gives cover for men to hurt and abuse whoever they want with little practical repercussions. Next time,
thank God,
we'll be reading our first non-Dobson book for this podcast. The lights just went out here, and I've never had that happen.
I've never had that happen either.
We'll read our first non-Dobson book for this podcast as we continue to explore how purity culture has fucked up relationships. Don't worry, that one will actually be fun. It's a lighter episode, I promise. This beast is, in large part, due explicitly to James Dobson. His organizations have built the structures for it to thrive. Hell, this is why he was so eager to interview Ted Bundy. It's so easy to say dumb shit. Actual meaningful discussions require nuance, grace, and uncomfortable moments, none of which Dobson is willing to engage in. Brooke, I hate James Dobson.
I hate James Dobson. I hate purity balls. I hate purity rings. I love you. I
love you too. And listeners, I love all of you. For those of you who are out there recovering from purity culture, you're doing great. I hope you continue to heal for whatever that means for you.
You're doing great. You don't have to wait.
Yeah. Masturbate. And that's where we'll end it. I Hate James Dobson is Labor of Love. Written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Jake. I'm honored to be joined by my amazing co-host, Brooke. If you're enjoying the show, please consider rating and reviewing it, and if you want to connect with us more, you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at I Hate James Dobson, and on Twitter at I Hate JDobs. If you want to email us, you can do so at ihatejamesdobson@gmail.com. Special thanks to Drew, Lindsay, DJ, and Jack. Our theme music is by Mood Maze, and the song is called Trendsetter. Thank you for enjoying our show.